Lucid dream.
Jin-ho was an ordinary salaryman, living in the bustling city of Seoul. His life was a monotonous cycle of work and sleep, with little excitement to break the routine. He was a software engineer by trade, but his dreams were anything but logical. They were vivid, chaotic, and increasingly nightmarish. It was on one such night, after another long day at the office, that Jin-ho's world began to unravel. He went to bed, hoping for a few hours of peace, but what he found in his dreams was a terror beyond his wildest fears. Jin-ho found himself back in his old elementary school classroom, a place he hadn't thought about in years. He was a child again, sitting at a wooden desk, surrounded by classmates who were frantically scribbling answers on their test papers. The room was eerily silent, the only sound being the scratching of pencils on paper. He felt an odd sense of detachment, as if he were watching the scene from outside his own body. It was then that he remembered the strange advice from a dream he had weeks ago: stretch your fingers backward. If they bend without pain, you are in a dream. Curious and somewhat amused, Jin-ho stretched his fingers backward. They bent effortlessly without the slightest hint of pain. He chuckled to himself, realizing that he was indeed dreaming. With this newfound awareness, he decided to have a little fun. He began goofing around, making funny faces and noises, confident that none of it mattered since it was all just a dream. But as he continued to play, he noticed his classmates had stopped writing. They were all staring at him. Their faces began to twist and contort, morphing into grotesque, nightmarish visages. Eyes bulged, mouths stretched into impossible shapes, and skin sagged and peeled away, revealing raw, bloody flesh beneath. Jin-ho's heart pounded in his chest. The playful atmosphere had turned sinister in an instant. He tried to wake up, but no matter how hard he pinched himself or shouted, he remained trapped in the nightmare. The monstrous children began to chant his name, their voices blending into a horrifying cacophony. Jin-ho awoke with a scream, drenched in sweat. He bolted upright in his bed, his heart racing. The memory of those twisted faces lingered, etched into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him, even as he got ready for work. At the office, he tried to focus on his tasks, but the nightmare haunted him. During a coffee break, he decided to confide in his colleague, Min-soo, hoping that talking about it might alleviate some of the fear. "Min-soo, I had the most terrifying dream last night," Jin-ho began, his voice trembling. "I was back in school, taking a test. I realized I was dreaming because I stretched my fingers, and they bent backward without pain. But then my classmates' faces, they turned into these horrible, grotesque monsters." Min-soo chuckled dismissively. "Sounds like you've been watching too many horror movies, Jin-ho. It's just a dream. Don't let it get to you." Jin-ho forced a smile, trying to brush it off as well. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The rest of the day passed in a blur, his mind preoccupied with the nightmare. That night, Jin-ho lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep, the memory of the nightmare replaying in his mind. In a moment of desperation, he decided to test the method again. He stretched his fingers backward, half expecting them to bend. To his horror, they did, painlessly. His mind reeled. He remembered talking to Minsu earlier, but the details felt hazy, like a distant memory. Panic set in as he realized he might still be dreaming. He tried to recall his entire day, but it felt fragmented, disjointed. He hadn't actually left his apartment. He had never gone to the office. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He was still trapped in the nightmare. Jinho's nights became a battleground. Each time he closed his eyes, he was plunged into a world of horror. The twisted faces of his classmates haunted him, their grotesque features more vivid and terrifying with each encounter. The line between dream and reality blurred further, and he found it increasingly difficult to discern one from the other. He tried staying awake, but the exhaustion soon overwhelmed him. When he did sleep, he was tormented by the same nightmare, the same eerie classroom, and the same monstrous faces. He became a shell of his former self, his once vibrant eyes now dull and haunted. His colleagues noticed the change in him. Minsu approached him one day, concern etched on his face. "Jinho, you don't look well. Maybe you should see a doctor." But Jinho couldn't bring himself to tell Minsu the truth. He nodded numbly, knowing that no doctor could help him escape the nightmare that had become his life. Desperation drove Jinho to seek out a solution. He delved into research on lucid dreaming, hoping to find a way to control his dreams. He read about techniques to confront and conquer nightmares, clinging to the hope that he could reclaim his life. One night, armed with the knowledge he had gathered, Jinho entered the nightmare willingly. He found himself back in the classroom, the air thick with tension. The children stared at him with their grotesque faces, but this time he was prepared. He confronted them, demanding to know why they tormented him. The room fell silent, and the children's faces twisted further, their voices merging into a single, chilling whisper. "You have been chosen, Jinho. The power to traverse dreams is both a gift and a curse. You must learn to control it or be consumed by it." Jinho felt a surge of determination. He had to break free from this curse. He focused on the techniques he had learned, forcing himself to take control of the dream. The classroom began to dissolve, the grotesque faces fading into darkness. But something went wrong. The darkness didn't lift. He was trapped in an endless void, the oppressive silence pressing down on him. He tried to wake up, to escape, but he was locked in the blackness alone. A cold, creeping fear settled into his bones. This was no longer just a dream. This was his reality now. He was never going to wake up. Days turned into weeks, and Jinho's absence was noticed at work. His colleagues assumed he had taken a leave of absence or perhaps moved on to another job. Minsu tried calling and even visited Jinho's apartment, but there was no answer. It was as if Jinho had vanished from the face of the earth. In the eternal void of his nightmare, Jinho wandered aimlessly, his mind slowly unraveling. The twisted faces of his classmates haunted him, their grotesque visages a constant reminder of his torment. He realized with growing horror that he was trapped in a cycle, a never-ending loop of fear and despair. The keeper of dreams appeared before him, his face a mask of cold indifference. "You have failed, Jinho. The power you sought to control has consumed you. This is your eternity," Jinho screamed. But no sound escaped his lips. The darkness swallowed him, his mind fracturing into a million pieces. He was a prisoner of his own nightmares, forever lost in the abyss. Back in the waking world, Jinho's apartment remained untouched, a silent testament to his existence. Dust gathered on his belongings, and the world moved on without him. His colleagues eventually forgot about him, his name becoming a distant memory. Jinho had become a ghost, a shadow trapped between dreams and reality, his fate sealed by the curse he could never escape.
Mannequins of Beauty.
Day 1, the first thing I remember is the smell. A pungent mix of formaldehyde and decaying flesh, the kind of odor that sticks to the back of your throat and refuses to let go. I woke up in darkness, my wrists bound by rough, coarse ropes that dug into my skin with every movement. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, my mind foggy. Panic set in as I struggled to remember how I got here. Light flooded the room as a door creaked open. I squinted, trying to make out the figure in the doorway. He was tall and thin, with an unsettlingly calm demeanor. His eyes were a cold, piercing blue, devoid of any warmth. He wore a white lab coat, stained with splatters of various colors. "Good morning," he said, his voice eerily soothing. "You're probably wondering where you are." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and all that came out was a raspy croak. "Don't strain yourself," he continued, walking towards me. "You're in my workshop. My name is Dr. Marcus Hale, and you, my dear, are going to help me with my latest masterpiece." Dr. Hale didn't waste any time. He injected me with something that made my head swim, then began his preparations. He explained each step in meticulous detail, as if I were a student in one of his classes. He spoke of preserving beauty, of capturing it in its purest form. His words were like a twisted symphony, a macabre dance between madness and artistry. I watched in horror as he wheeled in a young woman, her eyes wide with terror. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and porcelain skin. Dr. Hale caressed her face gently, almost lovingly, before beginning his work. I couldn't look away as he meticulously dissected her, preserving every inch of her flawless skin. The days blurred together in a haze of pain and terror. I lost track of time, my sense of reality slipping away. Dr. Hale's workshop was a nightmarish place, filled with the preserved remains of his creations, mannequins made from human skin, their eyes empty and lifeless, each one a testament to his twisted obsession with beauty. He would often sit with me, showing me his latest work. His eyes would light up with pride as he described the process, the care he took in preserving every detail. He spoke of his victims as if they were willing participants, thanking them for their contribution to his art. I knew I had to escape. I couldn't let myself become another one of his macabre creations. I watched him closely, noting his routines, his habits. He was meticulous, but he was also arrogant. He believed he was untouchable, that his genius would protect him. One night, while he was engrossed in his work, I managed to loosen the ropes binding my wrists. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept towards the door, praying he wouldn't notice. I reached the handle and pulled, but it was locked. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with the keys I had stolen from his pocket. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, turning to face Dr. Hale. His eyes were filled with a mix of rage and disappointment. "Why would you want to leave?" he asked softly. "Don't you see the beauty in what I am creating?" I had to find a way out. I couldn't let him win. My mind raced with plans, but each one seemed more hopeless than the last. Dr. Hale was always one step ahead, always anticipating my next move. But then I noticed something, a small, overlooked detail. The door to his workshop had a flaw, a weak spot that could be exploited. It wasn't much, but it was my only chance. I waited until he was distracted, then made my move. I used a piece of broken glass to pry open the door, slipping out into the cold, dark hallway. My heart pounded as I ran, my footsteps echoing through the silence. I stumbled through the darkness, my vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. I could hear Dr. Hale's voice behind me, calm and unhurried. "Come back, my dear," he called out. "You don't understand. This is for your own good." I didn't stop. I couldn't. I pushed myself forward, desperate to escape the nightmare that had consumed my life. I found a window and shattered it, climbing out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. It meant I was free, or so I thought. The police didn't believe me at first. My story sounded too fantastical, too horrific, but they couldn't ignore the evidence. Dr. Hale's workshop was discovered, a house of horrors that defied imagination. The mannequins, his masterpieces, were all there, silent witnesses to his madness. Dr. Hale himself was nowhere to be found. He had vanished, leaving behind only his twisted legacy. The authorities launched a manhunt, but I knew he was too clever to be caught so easily. I tried to rebuild my life, but the memories haunted me. I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards filled me with dread. I knew he would come for me eventually. The nightmares never stopped. Dr. Hale's voice echoed in my mind, his cold blue eyes haunting my every waking moment. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and tried to disappear, but he found me. I knew he would. One night I returned home to find a package on my doorstep. Inside was a single preserved rose and a note. "Your beauty will be eternal, my masterpiece. M.H." I dropped the note, my hands trembling. He was still out there, and he wasn't finished with me. I could feel his presence, like a shadow creeping closer with each passing day. The fear became too much to bear. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every sound, every movement in the dark sent me into a panic. I knew I couldn't keep running. He would find me, no matter where I went. I began to prepare. I fortified my home, set traps, and learned how to defend myself. I knew it was only a matter of time before he made his move. I wouldn't go down without a fight. It happened on a stormy night. The wind howled outside, rain pounding against the windows. I was on edge, every nerve in my body tingling with anticipation, and then I heard it, the sound of a window breaking, footsteps in the hallway. I grabbed the knife I kept by my bed and moved silently towards the nose. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I had to be ready. I rounded the corner, and there he was, Dr. Hale, standing in the darkness, his eyes glinting with madness. He smiled when he saw me, a twisted, sickening grin. "Hello, my dear," he said softly. "It's time to finish what we started." What happened next is a blur. The fight was fierce, brutal. I remember the feel of the knife in my hand, the smell of blood, the sound of his laughter. I fought with everything I had, driven by a desperate need to survive. And then it was over. Dr. Hale lay on the floor, motionless. I stood over him, gasping for breath, my hands stained with his blood. I had won, but at what cost? I looked around at the chaos, the destruction. My home, my life, everything I had fought for was in ruins. I knew I could never escape the darkness he had brought into my life. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. I had survived, but I was forever changed. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But one question haunted me, lingering in the back of my mind. Had I truly defeated Dr. Hale? Or had he won by dragging me into his world of madness and despair? The answer eluded me, a dark, twisted enigma that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. The end, or perhaps the beginning of a new nightmare.
Mandela Effect.
It started as an innocent conversation among friends. We were lounging in my living room on a stormy night, the rain pelting against the windows in a rhythmic assault. The power had flickered out, leaving us in the dim, flickering glow of a few scattered candles. We had exhausted the usual topics of gossip and small talk, and the conversation had turned to the Mandela Effect. "Remember the Berenstain Bears?" Sarah asked, her voice low and conspiratorial. Except it was never Berenstain, it was Berenstain. "Yeah, I remember," I reply, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It's so weird how so many people remember it wrong. "Or how about the Monopoly man?" Jason chimed in. "I swear he had a monocle." "Me too," Sarah exclaimed. "But he never did. It's so strange." As we shared these collective misremembering, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had always prided myself on my sharp memory, but even I had been caught off guard by a few Mandela effects over the years. It was as if reality itself had been shifting, rewriting history in subtle but disturbing ways. "Do you guys remember the Statue of Liberty being on Ellis Island?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I could have sworn it was. "No, it's always been on Liberty Island," Jason said, frowning. "But I know what you mean. Sometimes it feels like our memories are being tampered with." As the conversation continued, the atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive. The candles flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, and the storm outside seemed to intensify. I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. It felt like we were teetering on the edge of some dark revelation, one that we weren't meant to uncover. After my friends left, I couldn't sleep. The storm raged on, and the shadows in my apartment seemed to move of their own accord. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of misremembered childhoods and altered realities. Eventually, I gave up on sleep altogether and decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. I stepped out into the rain, pulling my coat tightly round me as I made my way through the deserted streets. The city felt different at night, more sinister somehow. The street lights cast eerie glows, and the puddles on the sidewalk seemed deeper than usual. As I walked, I found myself drawn to an unfamiliar street. I had lived in this neighborhood for years, but I couldn't recall ever seeing this particular road before. The street sign read Mandela Lane, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the coincidence. My curiosity piqued, I decided to explore further. The houses on Mandela Lane were old, and decrepit, their windows dark and foreboding. The further I walked, the more the street seemed to twist and warp, the buildings leaning inwards as if they were trying to swallow me whole. I shivered, but I pressed on, driven by a sense of morbid fascination. At the end of the street, I came upon a small, dilapidated house. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light flickering inside. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was a chaotic mess of old furniture and dust-covered trinkets. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. In the center of the room, there was a small table with an old-fashioned tape recorder on it. Intrigued, I pressed play. The tape crackled to life, and a distorted voice filled the room. If you're listening to this, it means you've found Mandela Lane. You're not supposed to be here. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice continued, growing more frantic. You have to leave. They're watching. They know you remember. A loud crash from upstairs made me jump. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The voice on the tape grew more desperate. They're coming for you. They won't let you leave. Panic set in as I searched for another way out. The windows were boarded up, and the walls seemed to close in around me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had I ended up here? Why couldn't I remember this street? As I frantically searched for an escape, I stumbled upon a stack of old photographs. They were of me and my friends, taken at various points throughout our lives, but something was wrong. In each photo, there was a shadowy figure standing in the background, watching us. The same figure appeared in every picture, always lurking just out of sight. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone or something had been following us, altering our memories, manipulating our reality. The tape recorder clicked off, and the room plunged into darkness. I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting as they closed in on me. Desperate, I grabbed a rusty old pipe from the floor and backed into a corner, ready to defend myself. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, waiting. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was a man, but there was something wrong with him. His eyes were hollow, and his skin was a sickly shade of gray. He stared at me with a look of recognition, as if he had been expecting me. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a voice that set chills down my spine. "This place is not for you." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" He took a step closer, and I tightened my grip on the pipe. "I am a guardian of memories," he said. "It is my duty to ensure that certain events are remembered correctly and that others are forgotten." "Why?" I asked, my mind racing. "Why are you doing this?" He sighed, a sound that seemed to echo through the room. "There are things in this world that must remain hidden, truths that are too dangerous to be known. The Mandela effect is a side effect of our efforts to protect humanity." I shook my head, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "But why me? Why now? You have seen too much," he replied. "You have begun to remember things that were meant to be forgotten. For your own safety and for the safety of others, you must forget." Before I could react, he lunged at me. I swung the pipe, but he caught it effortlessly, wrenching it from my grasp. His grip was cold and unyielding as he pulled me towards him. "You must forget," he repeated, his voice a hypnotic chant. "Forget, and you will be safe." As he spoke, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. My memories began to blur, slipping away like sand through my fingers. I struggled to hold on, but it was no use. The harder I tried to remember, the faster they faded. In my last moments of clarity, I realized the true horror of the situation. The Mandela effect wasn't just a harmless quirk of memory. It was a deliberate act, a means of controlling and manipulating reality. The Guardian and his kind were erasing our memories, rewriting history to suit their own purposes. As my consciousness slipped away, I saw the shadowy figure from the photograph standing behind the Guardian. It reached out a hand, and I felt a cold, numbing sensation spread through my body. My vision darkened, and I knew that I was about to forget everything. I awoke in my apartment. The storm outside reduced to a gentle drizzle. The candles had burned down to stubs, and the first light of dawn was creeping through the windows. My friends had long since gone, and I was alone. For a moment, I couldn't remember how I had gotten there. My mind was a foggy haze, filled with half-formed memories and fleeting impressions. I felt a strange sense of loss, as if something important had been taken from me. As the days passed, I began to notice subtle changes in my life. Little things that didn't quite add up, friends who seemed different, places that felt unfamiliar. The Mandela effect became a common topic of conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a harmless curiosity. One night, as I was flipping through an old photo album, I came across a picture of me and my friends. We were standing in front of the Statue of Liberty, laughing and smiling. But in the background, barely visible, was a shadowy figure watching us. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that I had seen that figure before, in my dreams, in my memories, in the forgotten corners of my mind. It was always there, lurking just out of sight. And then it hit me, the final, horrifying revelation. The Mandela effect wasn't just about misremembered details. It was about something much darker, a hidden truth that we were never meant to uncover. As I stared at the photograph, I knew that I would never be the same. The shadows of memory had taken root in my mind, and there was no escaping them. The Mandela effect was not just a quirk of the human brain. It was a sinister force lurking in the shadows.
Blue screen of death.
Ryan was a software engineer by profession, a man whose world revolved around codes and algorithms. The steady hum of his computer provided a rhythmic comfort, a constant companion through countless nights spent debugging and programming. But lately, something has changed. The machine he trusted began showing signs of rebellion, subtle at first lags, unexpected restarts, and then the dreaded blue screen of death. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Ryan had been working on a crucial project, a cybersecurity algorithm designed to detect anomalies in real-time data streams. He was deep in the zone when his screen flickered and turned blue. White text appeared, detailing a generic error message, but it was the string of hexadecimal codes at the bottom that caught his attention. They seemed oddly familiar. Ryan rebooted his computer, attributing the crash to a temporary glitch. He resumed his work, but it wasn't long before the blue screen appeared again, and then again. Each time the codes at the bottom changed slightly, but the pattern remained the same. It was almost as if the machine was trying to communicate with him. Days turned into weeks, and the crash became more frequent. Ryan's frustration grew, but so did his curiosity. He began documenting each error message, compiling the codes in a separate file. The more he looked at them, the more he realized they weren't random. They formed a sequence, a string of data that hinted at something beyond mere malfunction. One night, after yet another crash, Ryan decided to delve deeper. He cross-referenced the codes with known error messages and found no match. It was as if his computer was generating unique codes that seemed to follow a logic of their own. Driven by a mix of irritation and intrigue, he started analyzing the sequences, trying to decode their meaning. Ryan's initial hypothesis was that it was some form of encrypted data. He ran various decryption algorithms, but found nothing comprehensible. It wasn't until he noticed the code's structure that a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if these weren't random at all? What if they were instructions? Ryan's obsession grew. He stopped going out, stopped answering calls, and even neglected his hygiene. His apartment turned into a chaotic workspace with printouts of hexadecimal codes strewn across the floor and walls. He spent hours, sometimes days, trying to piece together the puzzle. As he delved deeper, he began to see a pattern. The codes seemed to reference his own files, his projects, his personal data. It was as if his computer was accessing his life, breaking down the barrier between man and machine. The realization was horrifying. He felt exposed, violated. One night, after a particularly intense session, Ryan fell into a fitful sleep at his desk. He dreamed of his computer, its screen glowing blue, the codes dancing before his eyes. When he woke up, he found a new error message on the screen, one that sent a chill down his spine. "We see you." Ryan's mind raced. Who were we? Was someone hacking into his system, manipulating his computer to drive him insane? He installed the most advanced security measures he could find, but the blue screens continued. Each one seemed more personal, more invasive. He felt like he was being watched, every keystroke monitored, every action analyzed. Desperate, Ryan turned to online forums, searching for anyone who might have experienced something similar. He stumbled upon a thread buried deep in a cybersecurity forum. The title was simple, "The Blue Screen Conspiracy." The posts were filled with accounts eerily similar to his own. People from around the world described the same pattern: repeated blue screens, unique error codes, and a growing sense of paranoia. The thread's creator, an anonymous user named Ghostbite, claimed that the blue screens were part of a larger scheme, a government experiment to control and manipulate people through their devices. Ryan was skeptical but intrigued. He reached out to Ghostbite, sharing his experiences and the codes he had collected. Days passed without a response, and then, out of the blue, he received a cryptic message: "You're closer than you think. Trust no one." Ryan's paranoia intensified. He stopped trusting his computer, his phone, even his own mind. He began to suspect everyone around him, his colleagues, his neighbors, the strangers he passed on the street. The world seemed to close in, the walls of his apartment feeling like a prison. He continued his research, piecing together fragments of information from the forum and other obscure sources. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that he was part of some grand experiment. The codes, he realized, were not just instructions, but a form of psychological manipulation designed to push him to the brink. In a moment of clarity, Ryan decided to fight back. He wrote a program to intercept and decode the blue screen messages, hoping to find the source. As he ran the program, his screen turned blue once more. This time the message was different, a single line of text that made his blood run cold. "We are in control." Ryan's program identified a hidden file on his hard drive, one that had been there all along, invisible to regular scans. He opened it, finding a trove of data logs of his activities, personal information, even transcripts of his conversations. The file contained a detailed account of his life, as if someone had been documenting his every move. Among the data, he found references to a project called Operation Overwatch. It seemed to be a government initiative using advanced AI to monitor and influence individuals deemed to be threats. Ryan's name was on the list, marked as a high-priority target. His mind reeled. Had his entire life been orchestrated by this unseen force? Was every decision he made, every action he took, influenced by this operation? The implications were terrifying. He felt his grip on reality slipping, the line between truth and paranoia blurring. Ryan's life became a nightmare. He couldn't trust his own thoughts, couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. He disconnected his computer, smashed his phone, and cut himself off from the digital world. But the blue screens haunted him, appearing in his dreams, his waking thoughts, a constant reminder of his lack of control. One night, in a final act of desperation, Ryan decided to confront the entity behind the blue screens. He reconnected his computer, booted it up, and waited. The screen turned blue almost immediately, but this time he wasn't afraid. He typed a single message. "What do you want?" The response was immediate: compliance. Ryan's mind raced. What did compliance mean? Was he supposed to follow orders, accept his fate as a pawn in this twisted game? Or was there another way out, a way to break free from the cycle? Ryan knew he had to make a decision. He could continue fighting, risking his sanity and his life, or he could give in, accept the control, and find a way to live within the constraints of the system. The thought of surrendering repulsed him, but the alternative seemed equally bleak. In a moment of clarity, Ryan realized that the true power lay in his perception. The blue screens, the codes, the sense of control, they were all designed to break him, to make him believe he was powerless. But if he refused to accept that narrative, if he chose to see the blue screens as nothing more than a glitch, a malfunction, then he could reclaim his agency. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and made his choice. The blue screen flickered, the codes danced, but Ryan no longer saw them as a threat. He saw them for what they were, an illusion. The blue screens never stopped. They appeared less frequently, but they were always there, a reminder of the hidden forces at play. Ryan learned to live with them, to navigate the fine line between reality and conspiracy. He shared his story with others, warning them of the potential dangers lurking within their devices. Some believed him, some didn't. The world moved on, the digital age advancing with each passing day. But for Ryan, the question remained, what was the true nature of the blue screen of death? Was it a simple computer error, a malfunction of hardware and software? Or was it something deeper, darker, a glimpse into a hidden world of control and manipulation? The answer, he realized, was not for him to decide. It was for the reader, the observer, the next person who faced the blue screen to determine for themselves. The truth, like the codes, was out there waiting to be uncovered. In the end, the blue screen of death became a symbol, a modern-day myth, a reminder that in the digital age, the line between reality and conspiracy is always just a flicker away.
Blackwood Lane.
I always knew there was something off about the house on Blackwood Lane. When I inherited it from my great-aunt Emily, the family black sheep, I was skeptical. But my life in the city had become unbearable, and the thought of a secluded home in the country was a welcome escape. The day I moved in, a dense fog hung low over the house, shrouding it in an eerie silence. The locals eyed me warily as I passed through the village, their whispers following me like shadows. Despite their reluctance, I was determined to make this place my own. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and creaking floorboards. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. I spent the first few days cleaning, unearthing long-forgotten trinkets and family heirlooms. Among them, I found a leather-bound journal belonging to my great-aunt. It was filled with cryptic entries about the children and the whispers. At first, I dismissed them as the ramblings of a lonely old woman. But as the days passed, I began to feel a presence in the house, a feeling of being watched. It started with the whispers. At night, as I lay in bed, I could hear faint murmurs just beyond the edge of sleep. I would get up, thinking it was the wind or the creaking of the old house, but the whispers persisted. They seemed to come from the walls, from the floor, from everywhere and nowhere at once. One night I decided to follow the whispers. They led me to the attic, a place I had been avoiding since I moved in. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, the whispers growing louder with each step. The attic was a dusty, cluttered space filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. In the corner, I saw a small wooden rocking chair swaying gently back and forth, though there was no breeze. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I felt a cold hand brush against my neck, and I spun around, but there was no one there. Heart pounding, I fled the attic, vowing never to return. The next day, I found an old photograph album among my aunt's belongings. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something strange. In almost every picture, there were shadowy figures lurking in the background. Children, their faces pale and eyes hollow, stared out from the photographs, their expressions vacant and haunting. I tried to brush it off as a trick of the light or a flaw in the film, but deep down I knew there was something more. That night, as I lay in bed, I saw them, faint, ghostly apparitions of children standing at the foot of my bed. They didn't move or speak. They just watched me with those hollow eyes. Panic surged through me, and I bolted from the bed, running to the living room. As I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I noticed a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil. She raised a hand and pointed towards the basement door. The basement was the one place in the house I hadn't explored. It was dark, damp, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. but I knew I had to go down there. The veiled woman was gone, but her presence lingered, urging me forward. I descended the creaky steps, flashlight in hand. The basement was filled with old furniture, broken toys, and stacks of dusty boxes. In the far corner, I found a small door, barely visible behind a pile of crates. It was locked, but the key was hanging from a nail on the wall. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and cramped, filled with the stench of mildew and rot. In the center of the room, I saw a circle of small wooden chairs, each one occupied by a child's doll. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine. On the floor, I noticed a pattern of strange symbols carved into the wood. They were the same symbols I had seen in my aunt's journal. As I knelt down to get a closer look, I heard the whispers again, louder this time, almost deafening. The whispers grew until they were all I could hear, a cacophony of voices filling my mind. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. I found myself standing in a different room, a nursery. The walls were painted a soft blue, and toys were scattered across the floor. In the center of the room stood a crib, and inside, a baby cried softly. I approached the crib and looked inside. The baby looked up at me with those same hollow eyes, and I realized with horror that it was one of the children from the photographs. Before I could react, the scene shifted again, and I was back in the basement. The veiled woman stood before me, her veil lifted to reveal a face twisted in anguish. She reached out a hand and touched my forehead, and suddenly I understood. The children, the whispers, the apparitions, they were all connected. My great-aunt had made a pact with dark forces, sacrificing the children of the village to gain eternal life. But the ritual had backfired, trapping their souls in the house and cursing her to an eternity of torment. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to break the curse. I gathered the dolls and placed them in the circle of chairs, reciting the incantation I had found in my aunt's journal. The room grew cold, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. The doll's eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and the house began to shake. I felt a force trying to push me out of the room, but I held my ground, continuing the incantation. The symbols on the floor glowed, and the spirits of the children appeared around me, their faces no longer hollow, but filled with a sense of peace. With a final surge of energy, the house shuddered, and the whispers stopped. The dolls collapsed to the floor, lifeless once more. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, and I knew the curse had been broken. The house on Blackwood Lane was no longer a place of fear. The spirits of the children were at peace, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. I spent the next few days cleaning up the basement and sealing the small room, determined to leave the past behind. As I prepared to leave, I found one last entry in my great-aunt's journal. It was a letter addressed to me, written in a shaky hand. She apologized for the horrors she had unleashed and begged for my forgiveness. She had hoped that one day someone would come to break the curse and free the children. I left the journal on the mantelpiece and walked out of the house, closing the door behind me. As I drove away, I looked back one last time. The house stood silent and still, a testament to the horrors it had witnessed and the peace it had finally found. I never returned to Blackwood Lane, but the memories of that place stayed with me. It was a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places and the strength it takes to confront it. Though now that I'm looking back at it, what was it that my great-aunt wanted an eternal life for? Was it for herself, or was it for something greater that we won't be able to understand? Is there a greater force that is forcing her to do these actions? And where did she even learn how to cast the spells? I have so many questions left to be answered, but one thing is for certain, that we are not alone. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you again next week.